So let's look at the evangelical revival in Europe and America. So the close of the 17th century and the beginning of 18th century is a period of gloom and darkness for the church. So what we are saying here is that this particular period, the church were not doing as they ought to. Like the government was seized churches. People could not express their belief. They couldn't do what they were meant to do. So that particular period, people were no longer devoted like they used to. You get? So Europeans changed towards God and religion at that particular time. Like they were no longer devoted and all. So in the early 18th century, there was a revival that burst out, and this actually renewed the zeal and commitment of people, of those Christians to preaching the gospel. And then they had a deep concern for the personal act of conversion, like they want to convert people to Christianity. And before then, they were actually involved in different things, gambling, drunkenness, and all. And then the church lost control because the clergy were also negligent. They were also worldly as well. The clergy were also like that. So they started preaching the gospel, and then as a result of this revival, one of the ordained Anglican clergymen, George Whitefield, got converted and began to preach in London and all. So he did open field crusade, having to preach a large crowd, gather them, got them saved and all. So this evangelical revival actually has a great effect on West Africa. It has a great effect on West Africa regarding planting of Christianity. The reason is that, when I said their zeal, their commitment actually increased, it doubled. So aside from the fact that they were converting people in London and all, they were now interested in coming to other countries of the nation to convert people. So the revival led to establishment of missionary society. So what we are saying is just that, like, let's say there's a church now in this town that, initially they were cold, but now they became so, they became revived, and then they started having this zeal. So let's say, aside from the fact that they started doing evangelism around their neighborhood, they decided to go to places to preach. That was what happened. So all these churches started creating the missionary society that can go outside the country to preach. So this revival led to establishment of missionary society like Baptist Missionary Society, Church Missionary Society called the CMS, Wesleyan Methodist Society, and all. So all these missionaries played one role or the other in planting Christianity in West Africa. So this revival also led to the abolition of slave trade. It led to the abolition of slave trade. So as at that time, slavery was considered as cruel, like it's an inhuman practice. Like I said, Portuguese trading slaves, so that was still going on. Do you understand? So that revival led to people coming out and say, we can't be trading slaves. Like this is not a good way to treat people. So the revival led to the establishment of Freetown in Sierra Leone. So what we are saying is that, after this, we are still going to the anti-slavery movement and all. So because of this revival, slavery was actually abolished, and then they had to look for a place to take all those slaves that they took from Africa, where to put them, and that was how Sierra Leone was established, called Freetown. So the free slaves were catered for in the coast of West Africa. So schools were also established in Freetown to train personnel for evangelical work in West Africa, like the Foreign Bay College. Then the revival also put an end to inhuman activities. Alright? So let's now look at the role of anti-slavery movement in founding Sierra Leone. So now we are looking at how Sierra Leone was founded. The question that brought us to this was that we're looking at contributions of Sierra Leone in planting Christianity in West Africa. So now we are looking at how Sierra Leone was founded, the role of anti-slavery movement in founding Sierra Leone. So now, the role of anti-slavery movement can actually you cannot underemphasize it. Like they actually did a great thing in founding Sierra Leone. So talking about people that were at the forefront when it comes to the movement, when they say there's a movement, like people coming together and say this thing must stop, this thing must not continue. So we have the likes of Granville Sharp, we have William Wilberforce, and in 1807, the spread of Christianity was made easy, and then they came up with they should stop slave trade. Like it's not making any sense at all. And then this was warmly received, and the British Parliament actually made the slave trade illegal in 1807. And then they now said that they should, like, they have a naval base where all the slaves that were still on their way, they had to stop them at Freetown. So I think that's where the name Freetown came from. So all those liberated slaves were put there. That's where they were, and those that were already in Europe were brought back to that place. So that's where Sierra Leone was founded. So a group of free slaves arrived in Sierra Leone from England in 1787 to form a settlement. So it failed, but was revived by the Sierra Leone Company, and then black settlers who had liberated themselves from African slavery were brought over from Nova Scotia, and they also built a new settlement. So literally, that settlement was called Freetown because different slaves were gathered together at the place, and that was where those missionary society now started coming to them, to preach to them and all that, started getting them converted. And they also established a school to train them, so that by the time they are going to their nations, they can take to their country, they can take them with them, and they can help them in spreading the gospel. So let's look at reasons for the founding of Sierra Leone. Like, why was Sierra Leone founded? So one of the major reasons for founding Sierra Leone was for religious purposes. Like I said, the revival actually led to the founding of Sierra Leone. So for religious purposes, the missionaries were consumed with zeal to preach the gospel, to spread the gospel of Christ to West Africa. So they believed Sierra Leone could be a starting ground. Reason is that the African countries you are going to, you already have Africans that are liberated there. So they need to use them, as guide to their country. So they have to start converting those liberated states that were there, and then they had the intention to also trade with the people to replace the abolished slave trade. So they are thinking of, okay, now that slave trade has been abolished, how we still need to trade with these people, so they have to look for other ways. So that's another intention. So imagine if you are entering my country with one of the liberated states, I will trust you people now. That's what they're trying to do. So the planting of Christianity in Sierra Leone was also to give room for scientific exploration, and also to sign treaties with the local areas in West Africa. So like I said, reason why they founded Sierra Leone for religious purposes, to have another a trade plan, to find something else to replace the slave trade. Then also scientific exploration. They want to know what is going on in the inland of West Africa, and also to sign treaties to use our land and all. So looking at the missionary activities of free slaves in Sierra Leone, all right, we have what's it called? The missionary society that came to Sierra Leone to preach the gospel. We have Nova Scotians. Nova Scotians were actually black settlers. They were blacks that were like slaves in America that were delivered, and they just came to settle in Freetown. Then we have the Baptist mission, the Methodist mission, the Church Missionary Society. All right. So let's talk about what they were able to do. So the first thing I was mentioning is we have the Quakers. We call them the Society of Friends. So the Quakers actually provided shelter for those slaves, provided shelter, food, clothing materials, and then they also built schools where they encouraged the teaching of African language. So these people tried to develop the African languages. They tried to help the people, those slaves, not to forget their language. So Anakilam, arrived in Sierra Leone from England, and then he already studied Wolof and Mandinka. There are two indigenous West African languages. So he actually advocated for the use of those languages to teach African children instead of using English, so that they can actually learn, And we also have the Nova Scotians. Nova Scotians also, they fought on the side of the British in the African War of Independence. So what did they do? Nova Scotians also were in Sierra Leone. They also established schools in Sierra Leone, and then those schools actually provided evangelists, teachers, Christian workers, and they preached to liberated slaves as well. They converted a lot of slaves to Christianity. Then we have the Baptist mission. The Baptist mission came to Sierra Leone as well through this David George, and then they built church and they were able to establish a congregation in Sierra Leone. Alright, and we also have the Methodist mission. The Methodist mission started their work also in Sierra Leone, and although their work failed because what's it called, the missionary that was sent, Warren, he died. They sent another one. That one also served for a while. Then they had to send another one. So, but even with that, they were still able to open mission stations in Sierra Leone and all. So that's that about Sierra Leone. So the next topic will be Niger expeditions.